All right.
Hello and welcome everybody to episode 75 of Comic DNA, on which we will be discussing Battle Angel Alita. And my good friend Alex Harner has joined me, and today we have special extra guest, or an extra special guest, his lovely wife Taryn. Alex and Taryn, my favorite power couple from Seattle. I'm so glad to have both of you on again.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad when I heard that, Taryn, when I heard that you wanted to talk about the book, I was very excited because, Alex and I, sometimes our conversations can get really, really wrapped up in their own kind of internal language.
Aaron Alex headspace.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's important to have a little bit of a more outside perspective than just the things that he and I have been talking about for the last 15, 20 years. I don't want to acknowledge how long it has been because I don't actually know, and I'm not going to do the math. But I'm very excited to talk about this book because this is a very special book to both me and Alex, but I particularly love this manga. This was one of the earliest mangas that I really got into, and I mean we can kind of talk about this. I think Alex, if we had a mutual art teacher who was a big influence on kind of our developing period in our lives when we were kind of looking into other things. And I'm hesitant to say his name because I don't know if we want to out him like that.
He remains anonymous, but
the thing is, he has the most amazing name I've ever seen for a teacher, an art teacher no less. He's not a teacher anymore; he's a pastor.
Right, that's another layer.
Yeah, so it's like I'm hesitant to just throw that out there, but maybe in a future episode we might divulge a little more information. But
I have this dream that we could actually get him on here, that he could weigh in on that.
I think we actually could, and maybe that'll be our goal for the next book, because we're just going to talk a little bit about this book, but maybe we'll do a future episode and we can get him on here because I bet we could.
Kind of fun.
Well, because not to sidetrack too much, but when the trailer for the Battle Angel movie came out, was first released, he actually messaged me on Facebook and was like, "Have you seen this?" And he's like, "Yeah, it was just reminded me. I was just thinking about old times in art class," and then we had a brief little talk about Battle Angel and the trailer. But we're not going to talk. I don't think we're going to talk too much about the trailer right now. Maybe we'll save that for another time. Yeah.
It's worth noting though that this art teacher, the fact that we both you kept in touch with him better than me, but he's someone who had an influence on us in terms of art and comics and cool
things. He had a profound influence on me. I can honestly say he introduced me to three of my favorite, not just favorite things, but three of my most influential artistic things on me. I do consider Battle Angel Alita incredibly influential, even in ways where I haven't actually read it in a long time, but I was rereading it and I was thinking, man, I've taken so much of this stuff in some of my own work that I've done without even really thinking about it. So it's been profoundly influential in that respect. He's also the man who introduced me to Terry Pratchett, who is my most read author. I wish I could say I have all of his books, but I'm slow to buy books, but I've read more books by Terry Pratchett than any other writer. Okay. And he also introduced me to David Bowie.
There you go.
The music, not personally, the music of David Bowie. Yeah. So, I mean, he was it's like, I know people like to get sentimental when they talk about teachers and the influence they have over kids, but I mean, it would be foolish to pretend this guy didn't have an incredible influence over the things that I experienced as a teenager and, kind of how I turned out.
It's on you, Pastor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all his fault. I mean, if you want to blame somebody, you could also we could also blame the teachers for how kids are turning out. But that's a totally different discussion, and we're not that kind of show. We're talking about comics here. One other thing I will say real quick is that part of the reason that Battle Angel is kind of so important to me is that it did come along at the time of my life, and I've talked about this before in other podcasts, when as a kid I read comics a lot. I was really into comic books, as you were, Alex, I believe. And when I got into high school, I almost completely put them behind me because I went through that phase where I was like, comics are for kids and they're stupid. And it also was like that era, that 1997, 98 era when comics really were stupid. They were just like the worst period of Marvel Comics and DC.
They were actually bad comics.
Yeah,
but also, it wasn't cool to be geeky.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, and this, I feel so weird talking about this, but it's important to stress that. Like, it was not like
there was no Infinity War.
Yes, exactly. We didn't have these movies. We had what was that TV pilot? I was so Generation X. TV show. Do you remember that one? I was like, Jubilee's gonna be in it. That's a real character. And
great.
But anyway, we don't have to go on to sidetracks and complaining about our history.
I don't know. Maybe this is the maybe not so much for kids.
Yes, but that's exactly right. So right. I kind of had this thing where I was like, comics are for kids. I mean, they were terrible. The ones that I was reading at the time were terrible. Now, of course, you can look back at that time, and there were so many great comics being produced. I just wasn't reading them because that was also a time when I was buying comics off the newsstand or in the grocery store aisle, which is not a thing that's done anymore. I read comics without ever going to a comic book store, and but so anyway, I put comics behind me, and then I kind of found manga and anime, and you could look back on it now, and it's not necessarily adult. It's pretty adolescent in many ways, but it wasn't as like childish, or it certainly didn't appear as childish as you just pointed out in that single panel. Just the fact that you can just see some like kind of grotesque stuff, and and so that I was kind of hooked on that. And so, like I say, it's like there was a period where I wasn't reading comics, but I was never not reading comics. I was just not following, Spider-Man or the X-Men or all the things that I'd read as a kid. But I was still read comics my whole life. And Battle Angel was one of the ones that really actually it might have been the first series that I read all the way through, the first manga series. Mm-hmm. Did you ever read the whole thing, Alex? I mean, I know our mutual art teacher did lend it to all of us. Like, I know we weren't the only two. There was a couple of the kids in the class. We went through his whole book series. He would we would pass it along. Whoever read the first book, and then they would pass the first.
A little inner circle.
Yeah.
Like students who were consistently a part of his classes and interested in the stuff that he was teaching, mm-hmm. and obviously had an interest in sci-fi and fantasy and things of that nature. He trusted a small group of us, and there were a few things that got passed around to it was 4 or 5 of us.
Yeah.
So this was the first manga I read in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
12 volumes or whatever it is.
I believe it was 9.
9.
Yeah.
I
can't. And this is the sort of embarrassing thing to admit. So I did go out and I was buying a lot of manga at the time, and that was back when Borders, the bookstore, was still
Borders existed.
And they had a huge. This was like the big manga boom, and they had a huge, manga section. And for some reason, so I did buy. I have the original Battle Angel book put out by Viz Comics.
Okay.
I don't know why. I'm just going to chalk this up to being a dumb kid. I bought volume 8 and 9.
Okay.
I have those in the right order. Or 8 and 9, whichever, because I really loved the ending to the series. And then I just never got around to getting the middle book. So I was gonna kind of refresh, some of the stuff, when preparing for this podcast, and I read the new book, which we'll get to talk about in just a second, and then I thought, well, let me take a look at these old books and kind of compare. And I opened up the last book, and I was totally lost. Like I was like, I sort of remember. I was like, I sort of remember the story getting to this point, but I do not remember how. So I'm really, really excited that the series is being re-released by is this Kodansha Comics.
Kodansha, yeah.
This is a beautiful, beautiful book. Like I was when you told me, Alex, that you were gonna send me this book, which I know I thanked you in the last episode, but thank you again for sending me this. I was gonna tell you not to bother because I already have the first old book, and Alex, as probably better than anybody, that I do have kind of a mental illness. And that it has bothered me for my whole life. It has bothered me that I have 3 of these books and not the whole collection. But I can't buy reprints to fill out the collection. I need to have all of the same series. So I either have to find the old versions of this or just buy all of the new stuff.
Yeah, it's right out.
Yeah. There's no mixing and matching. This is the whole issues versus trade paperbacks. I can't. If I start buying a series issues, I got to buy all of the issues.
Yeah.
So
I should add here too. So I got this new volume. I was really psyched. Taryn had never read it, so I had her read it.
Oh, okay.
I think you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love it.
And
so good.
we got to talking about it, and I gave her some of our backstory on. I was like high school. That was like art class, and she was what's the word I'm looking for? Very supportive of sending you a new copy of it so we can all talk about it.
Yes.
Basically, you should give Taryn props for this because I'm a lazy bum and a mediocre friend. But
well, that was the right.
My wife is very thoughtful.
She nailed it on that one. She made the right decision. So, all of that aside, so talking about this new book, I really like it does feel. I went back and was looking at the old stuff, and it does kind of feel nice to see it like have a proper release. Like I said, at first I was kind of like, I already have it, but this looks really nice. Like I like that it prints the color pages that are in color. And I do appreciate a good hardcover book. That's something that I used to not care about. I used to have that thing where I was like, I just want a book, and I want the cheapest one possible because I'm poor and I don't have any money. But now that I have a bit of a collection, you can see 2 bookshelves behind me. I'm starting to appreciate a fine release. Something that's a little nicer than just some paperback that's going to fall apart.
Right. Especially if it's a book that's important to you.
Especially if it's a book, yeah.
It's a nicely made object.
It is. It's really good.
Yeah.
So what I want to know, Alex, and Taryn, of course, but this is going to be like a weird chain series of questions.
Cut in whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. So you've probably not read it since high school, is that correct?
That is correct.
Oh. Okay, so I need to know, what were your impressions rereading the story? Did it all come flooding back to you? Had you forgotten everything? Was it just as great as you remembered?
I had forgotten a lot of the finer plot points. One of the things that stuck out to me, like that I carried with me from when I read it in high school, was how grotesque it was.
Yes.
It's visceral.
Yeah. Like it's light and fun, and the characters are very heroic, and it's also really dark. Like, this weird mishmash of just horrific and kind of fun and wacky.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me.
Yeah.
So that was the same, but the plot points and stuff, I was like, oh man, it's been like 20 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, and I haven't actually read it even full through to the end. I'm reading them now as they're coming out. We have 1, and then we have the 2nd and 3rd volumes that have come out. And
okay.
So I think there's one or two more that are going to be part of this re-release. But it's been a pretty wild ride, because at first I was just like, oh yeah, this is just some violent, like interesting kind of sci-fi. It seemed kind of like more surface level. But really quickly I started to realize, oh no, like this is really deep. This goes deep into like these really, prickly things, like where does the soul reside? Is it like if you're a cyborg body but like a human mind, like what part of you is still actually human, and
right,
and good and evil versus intentions, and like all these things, like do the means justify the ends, like these things. And I was like, this is really sophisticated and nuanced for being as like slapstick, like atrociously funny and stupid, and just like the guy had had a skull like skewered on his hammer. He's just like it's so casual with the violence that comes in, but then there's so much grace and beauty because of like the martial arts, the fighting, and I
agree. And that's something that I guess that's partially why it's kind of stuck with me for so long, and why it did have such an influence on me, is because on the surface it does look like just kind of another violent, sexy Japanese anime, because let's be honest, there's plenty of those out there. That
there's no shortage.
There's no shortage. But I think Battle Angel really does deal with some real literature themes. It's pretty heavy in what it talks about, and this was, and like in this, I don't want to keep talking about history and like putting it in its time, but I do think that it's important to remember that this would have, I read this the same time I got into Akira and Ghost in the Shell, and so to me they all kind of happened at the same time. It's important to remember that this was a time before the floodgates of manga were opened into America. Like this,
the wide acceptance.
Yeah. So what we were getting was basically the cream of the crop. Akira is perfect, and that movie came over, and everybody's like, oh, Japan has a lot of things to say. Yeah. And Ghost in the Shell is amazing, and again, they're smart, and they're really heavy, and they deal with a lot of things, and so they get really popular, and then somebody finally was like, Japan's loaded with these cartoons. We need to bring it all. And so, then you sort of started to see a lot of the less complex work. And I'm not saying that it's not entertaining in its own right, or that people. I'm not making like a critical judgment. I'm just saying that there was a period that I was really only experiencing like their best of the best, and then you start to like branch out, and you realize, like at first I was like this. I just chalked up Battle Angel as just one of those, just one of the mangas that I read, back in the day. But I realized it really is one of the best, and that's. At the time, that would be the reason why I read it at all, because the lesser stuff wasn't even available,
It wasn't on this side of the planet.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that Taryn, if you're really smitten with the way the story is going in this first volume, it just keeps building, and
right.
I think that I don't want to necessarily make predictions, but I think you might be a little blown away by the climax. Like there's kind of like a big turn, a big climactic reveal at the end of the story. You might remember it, Alex.
I do remember.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah.
And the book doesn't let up on any of the grotesqueness of the violence.
No.
No, in fact, it probably just gets worse.
Yeah. Without jumping too far ahead, we are a few volumes past this.
Okay.
Today.
Yeah.
But I forgot there's heads getting kicked off and stuff in this, like from the get-go. It's like
from the get-go,
shockingly like, whoa, that's crazy violence. Alongside some, more heartfelt, more serious themes. But by the third one, like, there's some stuff that's just like, this is like pit of the human soul stuff.
Yeah.
It wrenches you. You're just like, no, why?
Yeah. And we haven't even gotten to the big, kind of the conclusion.
The penultimate right now.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
So,
but I think it does a good job. Without talking about the ending, I think it does a good job of following the escalation of the story, and like kind of keeping like the momentum that's set up at the beginning, because the first story. So let's talk a little bit about like the first chapter, like where Ito finds Alita and they kind of set up the world. And I just have to assume that. Well, I was going to go off on a tangent about the upcoming movie, and I just assumed that the whole movie is basically just going to be the first chapter, because that's such a it's such a clear story, like with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and like a nice little twist where Alita thinks Ito is a serial killer that's hunting cyborgs, and Kishiro, sorry, I was trying to remember his name, Yukito Kishiro. He does a good job of kind of setting up that bait and twist, like through the storytelling. I like the way you see the scenes of the cyborg women and they get brutally murdered, and then it immediately cuts to a panel of Alita with the new body parts, and you recognize it, and you're like, what's going on here? And yeah, and I only bring that up not necessarily to just like so we can just talk about the story necessarily, but I think that it's really well done. Like, it's really well constructed comics. Like the story flows really well, and but it feels like that's kind of a I guess what I'm getting at is that that's a pretty small story in and of itself. You know, guy finds cyborg, puts it together, and it's kind of wrapped inside this genre story of like a horror serial killer, and then there's a nice resolution, and it's like a happy ending. The story keeps building bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes along, and it really does build into something much bigger and much deeper. One of the things that I like is that so like this book basically follows like the first two big story arcs where Alita becomes a hunter warrior, and she kind of chases and fights the worst Makaku. Makaku. Like this terrible cretin of a guy.
Yeah.
And then the second story is where she falls in love with the boy, and he's trying to save up a bunch of money to get to Zalem, and he turns out to be what's that?
Zalem, the city in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. And he turns out to kind of not be quite as good a guy either. He's got his own problems that that morals that he's willing to sacrifice, toward his goal. I really liked, like, rereading it, I should say. I really liked the mirroring themes of the world that's set up of people who are stuck at a certain station in life, and they see something high above them that they aspire to, because that was like Makaku was from the sewers beneath the scrapyard, and so his whole origin is that he is below the earth, and he's full of bitter resentment, and he wants to come up above and just make everybody know that he exists. And I can't think of his name. Who's the boy?
Yugo.
Yeah, Yugo. Yeah, and then Yugo kind of has like a mirrored story where he's in the scrapyard and he sees Zalem, which is the floating city, and he's an orphan, through various means, and he wants to do everything in his power to get to Zalem, so that he can feel like he has accomplished something, and where he's just convinced that a better life will be there because he's not happy with the way things are in the scrapyard. And there's a little bit more like plot details there, but I think the sweeping themes, that's what it is. And I guess like I said, I say that because it's just one of those things, like, I'm just struck by like how smart of a read it is. Like, it's not like, it all feels like it's like really written by somebody who's really has got an idea of like these themes that he wants to put in a story. It's not just violent cyborgs killing each other.
Right. Yeah. Gratuitous violence for the sake of gratuitous violence.
Yeah, it's quite striking. And as you proceed through the whole story, it does it is easy to look at it starting out, and you're just like, oh yeah, cute robot girl, she's just total trash and stuff, and it's crazy and violent. It's an easy thrill.
Yeah.
But it seems pretty clear that he wasn't making this up as he went. Like,
right.
It was plotted out ahead of time.
Yeah, there was some serious philosophy like put into this story, which, like I said, that's one of the reasons why it's one of the best.
Yeah, it's impressive because I think that's why in high school too. Like, I forget how different our brains were in high school, how sheltered we were to some extent, or what have you. I mean, I was like probably 15 when I was reading this, and if it had just been violent, I would have been like, like I didn't. As a high schooler, I wasn't a kid who was particularly into like horror movies or whatever.
Right.
But I remember like I kept coming back to this because it was like I got to know what happens, and like I'm getting invested, and like there's some bigger things going on here. It wasn't just like, again, the easy thrill. It's a little more surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really masterful use of these violent conflicts between various entities, and then these moments of tenderness in between, say, like Ito and Alita, or a little later on with like the man who owns the bar and the baby and the dog. And there's these. It's so grounded in like these big power players, but then also in these vulnerable creatures of the scrapyard. And he paints them in such a light that you really do feel for these poor, these people, like as flawed as they are, that they have stories of value and that they have a worth and a weight in the story. Like Alita brings that because she cares for them. Ito brings that as they're his neighborhood, his bros, as you were. And so there's that like a legitimate like sinking in my stomach when I know, or when these things play out, and it's like no, like someone needs to come in and save them, and they don't always get saved, and that's what makes that violence that much more poignant and not so just like mindless. I mean, especially when the violence does feel so mindless and excessive, then it just sort of drives home that point of what a brutal and sad life this is. So yeah, it's very powerfully written.
I think going with what you're saying there. I think that's one of the things that makes reading manga so interesting, especially if somebody like me or Alex, who's read a lot of not just American comics, but also American fiction in general. It can be kind of a breath of fresh air to read something that really is from like a different culture. And so your brain kind of gets used to looking for these typical story beats or the archetypes that you expect to see all the time. And so it's really not like all the time in your own culture. And so it can be really refreshing to get something that isn't always conforming to that, or can bring like a different perspective to the kind of story. And one thing that I didn't remember, this was something that I did not remember from reading the book when I was in high school, but I picked up on it rereading it, was I didn't remember all the baby stuff about the baby being kidnapped and her having to go and save him. And I also didn't remember the stuff about Ito saying that he was a hunter warrior for selfish reasons because he got a thrill out of killing people. And I reread that, and I was kind of struck by it because I see now the dichotomy that is being set up, the difference between Alita. Like, she's not just like a violent cyborg. It really is setting her up to be more of a heroine in a world where there are not that many heroes. Even the good people, like Ito, admits that he's kind of a, not that great, but he's kind of he's very self-deprecating. I forget what he says. He doesn't like, he's not as deprecating as Makaku, who like literally conceives himself as being a parasitic worm.
Right.
And
he says something to the effect of he's a selfish man who enjoys the sport of killing, or the thrill of it.
Yeah.
Which is why he does bounty work.
But he says something where he sees himself like because he's really protective of Alita, and he doesn't want her to become a hunter warrior at first. And I think it's because he sees himself in that respect, like, I'm a hunter warrior because I'm a bad person. And there's that moment where he realizes like Alita is not a bad person just because she's a hunter warrior. She's actually a good person trying to be a hunter warrior. And it's like a twist, not a twist, but like an awakening of his perception. I was struck because I reading that I thought back to our conversation about the last time we had you on, Taryn, which was to talk about Nausicaa, Princess of the Valley of the Wind, which is one of my absolute favorite books ever made.
Okay.
And we did spend a lot of time talking about how important femininity was to the character of Nausicaa. She wasn't just an action hero who happened to be a woman. It was really like integral to the character and everything that she did and how she was represented. And this concept of womanness, like being a woman, in a world, in that kind of a world. And I kind of was getting vibes on that from Battle Angel. Like, Alita wasn't just like a cyborg who is a sexy killing machine because women are sexy. Like, there was that moment with Ito where he kind of realized, like, she as a woman is bringing something different that he could even understand. And I think it kind of, like, visually that was represented by her need to save the baby. Even though it wasn't her baby, just like her, that's just that maternal instinct, I think, is kind of what was visually there. And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Some thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
The moment when she's in the sewers down there, she's talking to Makaku, and I actually was just seeing this, I was flipping through it a minute ago, and the moment when she puts that mud under her eyes, or grime.
I think it was it mud or blood?
I thought it was mud. I don't know.
Well, I might be getting mixed up with the anime, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But go on with.
Yeah, but in that moment, she shows her teeth. You don't have the fight isn't between that baby. Get the baby out of this. It's between you and me. And that's when because you see that mama bear, you see that in that defensive sense, but also in the sense of everything you need is right here. You don't need to be using this extraneous factor to get me in your sights, what you did is already clear to me and I'm seeing you. And that, I think, is why Makaku is so he clings on to her. And Ito's is this monster in love with Alita? Because of that, because she's giving him the thing he wanted, to be acknowledged, even though out of hatred and anger and a sense of impending destruction. But yeah, I thought that was really kind of interesting that the moment where she is kind of finding something new about her identity is in that moment where she steps into the arena and says, clear away this thing, which is very important to this baby, this vulnerable thing, but take that out of the picture. And I'm glad that the story does do that it allows her as an intellect almost, kind of, if you can imagine the disembodied head when she was first found.
Right.
That this intellect is exploring these things to say, okay, in one moment I'm oh hi, look, Ito brought
she's a cute,
beautiful hands, but then in the next moment she's wait, Ito is killing. Is Ito killing? She's starting to ask these deeper questions, and you see that innocence sort of start to come away, and she starts to remember a little bit, but it's not just handed back in some sort of bad soap opera. It's just she's unraveling these little bits of what does this mean to me that I feel so alive right now, and I'm so excited about to kick some ass. What is this? Is this me? Is this the body that I was given? And asking these questions, that it's really neat to see her explorations. Because where that goes with Yugo and stuff, where she's okay, I've got feelings. What's this about? She understands
for the first time.
Yeah. She doesn't have much context for it. And so when she's with him, she actually pretends she's oh, help. Hi.
Yeah, she pretends to be helpless. Yeah.
And because you see, she blushes and she's oh my, whatever this thing is, she's do I is this good? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
You're seeing her explore these different areas that are maybe a thing that is a feminine thing, or maybe it's just her trying to understand herself, knowing that she doesn't have all her memories. That's actually one of my favorite. I love the scene where there's this werewolf thing, and she's running away with Yugo, and she does this little backwards skeleton or scorpion kick. She kicks it from behind and completely shatters its skull out. It goes and Yugo's whoa, what just happened? But she's oh, what just happened? She's so funny because it's like, what is she doing? You know that she's basically a bazooka in a little black and a trench coat, but that she's trying to make herself vulnerable, like, because she thinks that that's what needs to happen in order to be able to entice you to go near. And it's so fascinating, the aspects of her personality that you get to discover with her as she's discovering it, whether it's a feminine aspect or a masculine aspect. It's really, really, it's like watching a ballet. It's so good. It's so good.
That's a good way to put it. Like, yeah, I think that's an important part of the story too, and we haven't really talked about that, is the fact that she's an amnesiac, and
yeah.
I think it's important. I guess it's interesting to talk about because that would be such a like easy story element. Like, she's a cyborg killing machine. She used to be a person. She doesn't remember who she is. So the whole story is just kind of doling out little tidbits that she's learning about, her past. And you see that in a lot of fiction. I mean, Marvel has been doing like decades upon decades of that with Wolverine. He doesn't remember things, and you get the story where he finds something out, and then you get a story where you find out that was fake. And then you get a story where you find out that never even really happened. And it just kind of becomes like the story of being the amnesiac is the story, and there's really nothing to it. And I like the way Alita is set up, in that it feels like a little bit more substantial in a world where, like, this is a world where you can literally kind of be anyone and anything. I mean, because like cybernetics have gotten to the point where you can completely just rebuild your body and change your whole life. And that kind of becomes the central question for her is, she has a machine body, but what is her identity? Like, she's just woken up, and does the past matter? I think that's the other kind of conflict that plays out in future stories of, what does that mean? Who you are versus who you were.
Right.
But like, I don't know, like, it's not too pronounced early on.
It definitely keeps returning to it, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's an interesting, in being an amnesiac, when Ito saves her and gives her a new body, it's almost like she's reset to being a child.
Yeah.
But she's aware that there was something else.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing, as you both said, this sort of, she goes from this kind of naive, silly girl, but also this fearsome power, and then she's almost like working through, like, and then she's kind of a teenager, and then she's kind of
basically like, you're watching somebody grow up through this story, and I think, again, just to kind of go back to this, like, one of the reasons that makes this story so great is that it really is just nailing all of these archetypical experiences that is like a central part of human experience. So she is like representing something really deep within everybody, and we're watching that play out in this story. And I think that's why it resonates so much. Like, again, the idea that she's basically been born at the moment that she's awakened by ego. And she's growing up and learning, and it's, I don't know, like, it just mirrors life, I guess, to kind of like not have a very profound ending to that sentence. It's a good mirror of life.
Right.
Yeah.
But in a really, like, not immediately obvious way, because it's inside this story of just cyborgs fighting and killing each other.
Right?
Yeah, the thing you first see is like just heads getting kicked off and just crazy, dark, grotesque world, and
right.
You're like, wait, it keeps returning to these things.
Yeah,
it keeps returning to these themes, and more to it.
You can't relate to the visual. You can relate to the emotional. Like, none of us have probably ever had an arm ripped off. But yeah,
right.
can relate to falling in love.
But
The things that it makes you do, that it like maybe it's incongruous with your personality when you're in love, or like young love.
Young love, yeah.
Yeah, it follows. It makes perfect sense. So you're seeing her go through these things almost with this sense of like you want to protect her, to be like, no, be careful with your heart, or like be careful with your mind, be careful with your body. And she's just like a teenager, and that you're almost like, maybe, I mean, we're old.
Who's this Yugo boy you brought home?
Exactly, yeah.
This kid's trouble.
Right?
You're not seeing things straight.
Yeah. So, again, let's just keep repeating ourselves and say that it's really great. But one thing another thing that's sort of like why it's always felt kind of special to me is that I've always sort of felt that it's one of the best underrepresented mangas. Like, I don't want to say ever, because maybe there is some really great manga comic out there that I've never read, and it really is the best thing in the world, and people just aren't getting, haven't read it. But I mean, the fact that it was never turned into an anime series. It had two.
It wasn't made into a movie, right?
It was, so it was made into two OVA episodes. That's original video animation, or is it OAV, original animated video? I can't remember. Japan does this thing where they're not strictly movies. They're just basically like two episodes that just released independently, like a whole series. Mm-hmm. And so there were two episodes made, and in some areas they were released as a movie, like a single, because it's two 30-minute episodes. Mm-hmm. But they basically cover the first two stories that are in this book that we were talking about here mostly. Okay. And so I've actually watched that several times. I don't have my original VHS tape that I bought. Uh-huh. I got rid of almost all of my VHS like some time ago when I was trying to clear off all the clutter out of my life. Mm-hmm. And I do maybe have just like the tiniest pang of regret of not having that, but I'm over it. VHS is inferior, and I have better quality versions of it now. So I have watched that a few times, and it's okay. It's like, even that feels like it doesn't really do justice to the original story. But sometimes I think maybe I'm being too critical, because a lot of times when you really get into the nitty gritty of the art, a lot of times animation just can't recreate that. It always looks so simplified and so almost dumbed down. Yeah. But the point of that is like that part of the story has stuck with me a lot. So like even though I have not actually read the books in a long time, I was very familiar, like rereading this. Like, it was all kind of there. But maybe that's another reason why I was struck with how much deeper it is, because it's not as deep in like the anime. It's condensed and simplified, and you read the book and it's just like, man, this is really like fleshed out and complex, and it's so good. Right. And it never really like it never really like made that leap like so many other manga series do to an anime series or even movies. And even all of the interest. So in America, James Cameron has been talking about wanting to do this Battle Angel movie forever, and it's been in various stages for long times, and now it's finally now coming out. And it just feels like it's like so long after the fact, because this really is, I do really think that this book is on the level of Akira and Ghost in the Shell. And Akira and Ghost in the Shell are kind of the go-to, like when people talk about, the best of the best of manga or animated movies, because the Akira and Ghost in the Shell both had really good movies made of them. And that's always the go-to. And I really think that Battle Angel stands right up there with them, but it's not as prolificated, in society. Yeah,
it's kind of the unknown. It was out of print for 10 years. Like, nobody talks about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's weird to me, because I grew up in Borders and Barnes and Noble, parked in that aisle.
Mm-hmm.
I was that scummy teenager who couldn't afford them, so I would sit and read and put it back. I would buy one. I would read 10 and buy one.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a fair amount of manga on my shelf. I never saw this one. If I did, I heard about it in passing, and I never got the chance to read it. Well, for one reason or another, through friends or finding it in the store. And I don't know why. I mean, I guess because it was out of print, but I wonder if there were other forces that, like, maybe because of the violent content or
I do wonder how much the violence plays into that, because it's not like at the time when manga was blowing up here in America, you know, through like Borders and stuff, they were really, really importing just a lot of that basic shonen and the young boys and the young girls stuff, the stuff that's really is more for kids. And this certainly, I mean, Japan's pretty fast and loose about how they rate things. You know, like their culture is slightly different than ours. Like, you know, we're real, you know, a few curse words and, you know, sexy stuff is right out. Violence, don't show any blood, but you can show people falling down. And it's like we're kind of okay with that. And Japan, you know, that's not necessarily the same sensibilities. So, but I don't think that this is really adult material. Like, it's not sold as like shonen material. Like, it's not something that's in. I don't think it was in shonen magazines. I could be wrong.
Correct me. So I'm forgetting my Japanese terms. Was shonen like teenage boys, or was it younger than that?
It was kind of young teenage.
Yeah, young teenage boys.
Maybe 16.
Okay.
Like, I think is a word for it.
Teenagers.
Shonen.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it. Yeah.
I'm curious just where it was actually kind of classified.
Well, like the most
designations, right?
The most popular like shonen manga and animes right now, like you look at like Naruto or My Hero Academia, this book is completely different than those. Like, it's on a different level. Like, not just in like what it shows, but even the topics that the story is addressing.
The intellectual content.
Yeah, exactly. The intellectual content is much deeper. And I mean, some of my Facebook friends know I recently started watching My Hero Academia, and I am enjoying it, but it's, you know, I don't hold it up as like great intellectual tenor. Like, it doesn't have the same intellectual tenor that Battle Angel does. Even though Battle Angel, again, as you said, on the surface, is just like almost like shock gore. You know, it's just on the surface it looks like just like an 80s slasher film. You know, it's just
robots.
Yeah, with robots.
Mm-hmm. I don't read a lot, or I don't follow any Naruto, but I have trouble picturing someone's brain getting kicked out.
Yeah.
More than once in Battle Angel.
Mm-hmm. More than once, yeah.
Arms just popped off.
Yeah. So that might be part of why it didn't quite catch on, because even in America, like in America, I think we're pretty soft on a lot of violence in the media, but it's really weird in how it's represented. Like, you'll see really, really violent films, they're PG-13, but then you realize it's like, yeah, it's really violent, but there's nothing really being shown. Like, people get shot all the time, but there's no blood anywhere. Like those Taken movies, it's like everybody talks about how Liam Neeson kills all these people, but it's like there's not a drop of blood in the movie, you know?
Right,
and, And whereas like a slasher film will have like a couple of really grotesque death scenes, and that's like rated R or worse, because you don't want to show all this stuff, even though it looks goofy, because you can only make it look so realistic. But I think that's part of what makes Battle Angel feel like kind of like it was made really in the 90s. Like, it was first released in Japan in 1990, and the last book I think I have. Let me look at this. It is look at this. 2001, fourth printing 2001 is when I would have bought this. So it's weird to think about that it was being released in America in the 2000s. But I also have a distorted view of time because I'm old, and but that's partially what makes it feel like an 80s like it just fits in with that like 80s grimy cyberpunk stuff.
Blade Runner.
Yeah, Blade Runner, or even like horror movies like The Thing, John Carpenter stuff. They didn't really hold back on a lot of the visuals, and it's kind of a criticism I have of the '90s is that like people started getting scared of the stuff that was happening in the '80s. So there was kind of the mass sanitizing of media and art in the '90s. Not even necessarily like through censorship. I think people in general just sort of started kind of becoming. I mean, just to bring up a relevant of James Cameron. Look at the difference between the first Terminator and something like True Lies, or even Terminator 2, you know what I mean? Like the first Terminator had it wasn't like gory or anything, but it's like, it feels like it's got a little bit of an edge to it. Whereas
there's a griminess to it.
Yeah, there's a griminess to it. And then like Terminator 2 and True Lies perfect that sort of like fun action where it's not really like you don't feel
not really uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's exciting, but it's not. It's there's nothing grotesque about it. Whereas that first Terminator, when the Terminator skeleton comes out, like it's uncomfortable, like to see just a robot machine skeleton.
Sure. That was Alien. That idea of like space truckers.
Yeah.
Obviously, Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
Like those movies we're so used to them now, but I remember first seeing those, and they were strange and a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
there's like this essence of like broken glass and mud inside your shoes, and
yeah,
like,
everything is filmed at night, and it probably just recently rained.
There's like a film on it, like an oily film of dirty water. Like there's this sense you can't escape. It's in the air around you. It's in the the water that you're drinking. And it leads to this discomfort over everything that's happening, because you can't sit back and say, okay, I'm just gonna pop my popcorn and have a good time. You have to participate to a certain extent because of how the visuals or how the story makes, like grabs your hand, makes you get in there and touch it too. And I think that discomfort is one of the most important parts of it, because of that sense, I think, of like, well, Alita at least can float above this, or she can be safe because she's the most powerful, but no, she's down in the mud, like she's wrapped up with this maggot thing around her neck,
right.
And like you can't step back and say, it's okay, we can just be safe and above all this, even though she's called an angel,
Right,
she's
right.
in it. Yeah, that's a really important part of all of those.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, again, just going back, I think that maybe that's kind of what leads into this, like the Battle Angel being in this weird spot where it almost came out like a little too late to kind of fit with the stuff that was but not really, because the Akira movie came out in '88, I believe, and Ghost in the Shell was '95. Although I think the Ghost in the Shell manga was a little earlier than that. I'd have to double check my dates, but
maybe it didn't. It's funny. It kind of falls right between those two.
It does, yeah. Well, I mean, it was running. Battle Angel ran for most of the '90s, and I think he finished it around '99 or 2000. Okay. Maybe a little earlier. But I do remember reading a quote specifically about the anime, the 2 episodes that he did, like why he never did more, and he just said he was too focused on making the manga that he couldn't really pay attention to the anime and make sure it was done properly. So I think it was his decision not to do any. Like he could have just handed it off to somebody, I assume, or he could have tried to, double his workload and make the manga while kind of keeping an eye on the anime, and then, but he didn't want to do that. So I think there is an aspect too of the creator not pushing it as far as it maybe could have gone. Because that's creators are weird.
Watch out for those creators. Yeah, I appreciate. I didn't. So there's been Battle Angel: The Last Order and Battle Angel.
Right.
Something About Our History on Mars. 2 series that came out after this that delved into other aspects of that, which I have not read at all. I don't know.
No, me neither. I haven't read any of those. So now I'm like, I'm totally like almost obsessed with it now. Like I got to get the rest of this new re-release, and I got to get the next books, and I got to really just dive in head first and go through all of this because, I've had that awakening, that nostalgia. It's like equal parts nostalgia.
I was pulled from a scrapyard and put in a new box.
Exactly.
Oh, good.
So yes.
What I was going to say though is there was more, but I think part of what made this feel special, at least when we originally read it, was that it had a limited scope. It wasn't a Dragon Ball Z or a I respect Dragon Ball Z. It's kind of amazing in its way.
Agreed.
But,
was it?
I appreciate, maybe it's just because American, serialized comics are exhausting.
Yeah.
I appreciate that there seemed like there was a vision with a start and an end to this. I don't know where he took it after that, but I know that these feel very intentional.
Yeah.
I really like. So.
And that was another thing, again, that like when I went through my manga phase, that's sort of like almost like the level 1 manga reader is like Japan is better than America because their stories actually end, and like, except for Dragon Ball Z and Naruto and One Piece, and they have long running series too. But there are creators that want to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And there are plenty of American comics that do that too. I mean, at the same time that I was getting into this, shortly thereafter, I discovered Vertigo Comics. And that's when I was like, oh, Transmetropolitan, Preacher, it's like, oh.
Bad.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, okay. So this stuff does all exist. I was just looking in the wrong spot.
At the time, though, all we knew was
exactly.
X-Men and
it was,
Spider-Man Clone Saga.
It was a direct jump. I'm not even joking. I had stopped reading the Spider-Man Clone Saga, and I stopped reading X-Men Onslaught. Those wonderful crossovers, and then Heroes Reborn started, and I was like, I'm done reading comics. Comics are dumb. And then our art teacher gave me Battle Angel Alita, and it was like, this is completely different. Like reading, like
no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like you go from Spider-Man to Battle Angel, and it was quite an eye opener, to say the least. And it was a little bit of that, where it's just like, this is so just different, and I certainly branched out and started reading and watching a lot of typically amateurish what's the adolescent manga, and I don't think you can see any of them in the background, but there's some there are some, like, I was having a hard time on the surface differentiating between your fan service anime series and something like Battle Angel and Ghost in the Shell. To me, it's all manga, it's all anime, and then exactly.
Do you think this is a bit of a tangent and probably also could become its own conversation in a separate episode? But
sure.
The concept of how Japan's culture evolved an understanding of visual, like what we call comics, like a visual illustration, versus America's understanding of that. Being that theirs had always, like going back to Hokusai, like early woodblock prints, the Japanese like aesthetic has for hundreds of years has been dark, heavy lines, color laid on top, basically comic strips. And that's why their whole visual culture is permeated with illustration, like even for like 3-year-olds in their textbooks and on street signs, and things like restaurants have their own like mascot.
Yeah, they all have like mascots and cartoons and stuff.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. And for us, it seems like, why do you guys have to like have all these goofy illustrations for everything?
Yeah,
but it's like that makes normal sense, and that also shows that there's like this gradient of like, that one's for 5-year-olds. This one is for 18 and over because it's got titties, like just like bam. So there's like, it was never a sense of like, this is comics, therefore it's only for your tweens, or it's only for, you know, elementary school kids, there was always this understanding that's like, well, this is a kid's one, but this one's an adult one, and that you can kind of figure out who it's destined for, you know, either from the cover or from the reviews or whatever, and that there wasn't really a distinction of the quality because it was illustrated. But for everything, like you said, that was coming to America, our concept was Disney animation and Disney illustration.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that we saw that had dark outlines and color filled in, if it wasn't in the Sunday comics, it was Disney. And all of that is light, trite, and for children.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, when you did see things like X-Men, and well, I mean, and I have to say this because I only know most of Americans' comic history from Alex, because I only have the context of the manga and the anime, having started my roots in Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z and Cowboy Bebop. Like that was
Whoa.
Well,
one of these things is not like the other.
I know, right? But that is where I started. So I never had that transition from like the Spider-Man over to the Japanese side. Like I started in Japan, so I quickly understood like, yeah, this one isn't for kids. This one's kind of dumb. It's fun, but it's dumb. But this one, really good. It's better than anything that I would watch on Saturday morning cartoons. So it's that weird shift of like, how much is this only for kids, and how much can we attach some sort of like overarching aesthetic value to something, when Americans are quick to say, oh, it's just a cartoon, or it's an illustrated movie, it's not even live action. Like there's this denigration for the thing because of the craft that clearly isn't inferior, but we just have such a different background than Japan, that it makes it hard to make an equal case, you know, for the art form.
I think it's, well, you're right. We could do a whole episode just on that topic. I do think that it's almost entirely cultural, and you have just the way, if we're talking now, like comics are a relatively new medium. Like they really, like comic books didn't start getting made until like 1940, you know, and it's weird to think that comic books as like a object have not been around for 100 years.
Right.
Now the comic strips started, yeah, exactly. Comic strips started a little before that, but they weren't collected into books. And just over that time, or this course of time, less than 100 years, but still, you know, a significant amount of time, cultures have evolved, and I think there are lots of outside factors that play into it, and just the perception of the way the two cultures were evolving differently. And I don't think, I don't know if I can just like, because I mean, I could, you know, you could talk about the biggest one in America, Frederick Wertham, and his amazing book, The Seduction of the Innocent, the moral panic in America of the 1950s. I also think that in Western culture, we're a little bit more afraid of images than like Japanese culture is. Like we attribute so much weight to like a visual depiction of something versus, I mean, just like look at, you know, you can put so much stuff in print that can just be sold over the counter at, you know, a grocery store. But if it's a comic book, it shouldn't, you know, it can't be sold, like people won't carry it. Like if it's a visual, you know, I mean, we can even just go down to the difference in like pornography. Like erotic books can be sold in grocery stores, but pornography has to be under the counter in like specialty shops in the back room. Like we don't like visuals. Like there's something about it that is just, and I think the reason is obvious, that it's just more visceral. Like you just react to a visual immediately without necessarily thinking about it the way you do text. And you read text and it creates something in your mind, and you engage with it a little bit more. Right. But that doesn't mean, I still think that again, that also is the power of visuals. A picture is worth 1,000 words. You know, you can, and I've said time and time again, I think that's what makes comics such a powerful medium, is that you can tell really dense stories that can be absorbed at a really quick pace. Like you can put something in like a 100-page graphic novel that would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of text that would take it would take a week to read through it, whereas you could read the graphic novel in an afternoon. And so I'm just kind of rambling on now about the pros and cons of visual images, but I think that has to play partly into it among a lot of other different reasons. But I think, again, that just kind of goes back to why it's so refreshing. And I think that's also why a lot of kids really get into manga and anime. Certainly kids of our generation, like you could read a lot of comics in the 80s and 90s. Like I think the Claremont X-Men stuff was pretty sophisticated, for what it was at the time. And then it's really easy to see how people that were reading that could make the jump to, you look at something like Akira and it's just feels so just so different, but at the same time, like natural. Like it's like you don't know why there aren't more stories like this. And I think that just comes like that culture shock of just like, this is something that's created in a different culture and that's why it is the way it is. And I think that's why teenagers specifically, like when we were teenagers, you get that late 90s, early 2000s period, like into the big manga boom, why kids latched onto it so much, because it is a little bit of a culture shock. And you look at it and you sort of see in American media this like the remnants of the culture war that was happening in the 50s and 60s echoed through our art after decades and decades. And you just don't have that in Japan. They have their own like cultural traditions and different ways of self-censorship, certainly, but it's just the fact that it's different. It can be really just like such a like almost like a profound experience, just because it's just so different.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm rambling, but but anyway, I know you guys don't necessarily want to sit here and watch me talk about how much I read manga as a teenager and it affected me, but I think I know you guys are a little short on time, so maybe we'll wrap this up. But
in about 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, no, there's no problem. But again, thank you for sending me this book. I'm gonna go out and find the other stuff that's been published, and I'm looking forward to the end of it. I don't know, any final thoughts that you have on the series, like in general? I'm gonna refrain from talking about expectations from the movie. I don't want to go down that road. But I mean, if you want to, you can. I'm not going to stop you.
That'd be fun to talk about that at some point.
I feel like it would have to be its own thing. Like we could do a whole episode on when the movie comes out. Maybe I will actually go see a movie like when it comes out in theaters, and I can join the national conversation as it's happening. Instead of watching a movie like 3 years after the fact and then complaining about it, nobody cares. I still haven't seen that Man of Steel movie, but I hear it's pretty not good.
Walk away, man. Walk away.
Exactly.
Well, there's a number of these still to come out. So I would love to talk about this more as more of these come out. We didn't really even get into the art very much. We didn't
talk about the art at all. So yeah.
Or the kind of the world design. I mean, we talked about the grittiness of it, but there's so much thought put into it.
I had a whole thing I wanted to talk to you about the world design but we'll save it for another time.
Save it for when Volume 2 comes out, or when you get a hold of it.
I'll get a hold of it soon. I'm gonna go on an Amazon book buying spree pretty soon here. I get paid tomorrow.
Amazon.
Sweet Amazon.
Yeah. Taryn, do you have any other thoughts?
It definitely it should hold a spot in the throne room along with Ghost in the Shell and Akira. And I'm sad that I didn't know about it before, but I'm so glad that they're re-releasing it so I can find out about it now. And I hope that like anyone who's ever even thought about reading manga would pick this up, or if they like Blade Runner, or even if they didn't like read it. I can't say enough good about it. So So just a little, but
A little bit of banner. A little bit of banner.
So
Well, yeah, we'll definitely do another episode. I'll get the other book, and we'll just have like our continuing discussion about Battle Angel. If for no other reason, then I want to keep having Taryn on this show to talk about things because
hey, yeah,
pretty insightful
there's
stuff.
things that we need to talk about. No,
she's a more energetic. She's a more energetic conversationalist than you are, Alex.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm the straight man. You're the talker.
I appreciate your precision in your speech.
It's just slow sometimes. Pull it together.
Yeah. But we'll do, Taryn. I hope we can get you on for some other episodes about some other things. Maybe we'll expand your reading list to some more American comics that can kind of live up to the standards set by the manga that you've been reading.
You know, she read Batman Year 100 last week.
Oh,
Last
I really
week?
liked it.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well. All right. So I mean, as you saw in the last.
We're going to talk about Batman Year 100.
No. I'm not going to talk about Batman Year 100. But as you saw in the last episode that we did, Alex, I showed off a lot of books that we're going to read in the future, and Batman Year 100 is on it. So next episode, Batman Year 100.
Yes, please.
Wow.
I mean, if Taryn just read it, we have to now. So because I got a lot I could say about that book and Paul Pope. Paul, obviously, it's no secret that Alex and I are both big fans of Paul Pope. Yes, and Battling Boy, yeah. We didn't get to have you on for the Battling Boy discussion. That was several years ago, back before we knew what we were doing.
Yeah, but I think we just said how great it was for like 40 minutes.
I'm afraid to listen to it again. I know we had my artist friend Kevin on for that episode.
Was Tim on that one as well?
Yeah, I brought Tim, my friend Tim. I just like made him read the book. I was like, Tim, just read this and talk about it with us. But yeah, we'll do Batman Year 100 next. I think that'll be a good one. And there are several others on the list. I think we're gonna get you to read, and I can talk about that. I don't know. Have you pushed? Yeah, exactly. Alex, have you pushed her into launching into Planetary? I know it's like your favorite.
I have talked up Planetary, but it's a big. I've got the Optimist.
It's a commitment.
It's big.
Yeah,
It scares me.
it's big, and it's kind of dense, but that's part of the discussion that we will eventually have about someday, but we don't have to rush into that one. All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I've got a few other mangas that I would like to read in the near future. Final word is that one thing I wanted to kind of talk about specifically in relation to Battle Angel was that a lot of the design and the style of it reminds me of one of my other favorite mangas, which is Tank Police. Yeah, exactly. So you know, Alex, you remember.
I do.
That was by Masamune Shirow. He also did Ghost in the Shell, but he did Tank Police, and he also did Appleseed. They're similar style, but a slightly different tone in what the stories are. And I always really loved Tank Police because it was pretty comedic. Like it was a little bit more fun, and stylistically, it was very similar to Battle Angel in just like that setting of that dark, grimy cyberpunk setting, but it wasn't quite as gory, and it was more goofy fun. But I would recommend reading that one, Taryn. I think you might enjoy it. But maybe that'll be one that we look at in the future. Okay. So I guess really I can't say the end. I'll say to be continued for the next Battle Angel. Yeah, and I think Alex, we're gonna have to maybe get on our little project, dig up this teacher and see if he's interested in putting his face on the internet. I really
that's the biggest danger, right? Is he willing to?
It's tough. I mean, it's
throw himself out there with some of his punk students.
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, I am not good at like making a show that people want to listen to and watch, so he's not really in danger. He's not in danger of exposing himself to like a big audience or anything. Yeah. Trust me, nobody watches this thing. You're fine. Nobody will even notice. All right. Well, we're going to call it there. I'm sorry, Alex. What was that?
I said it's worth a go.
Yeah, we'll try it. We're gonna try it. But that's for now. That's the end of this episode. Alex and Taryn, thank you both for doing this.
Thank you.
Great pleasure to speak to both of you. For anybody that is listening or watching, you can find me. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, but I admit I don't use it. But you can, if you want to message me or something, I guess I'm.
See it eventually.
I actually haven't checked it in a few weeks. Maybe I ought to do that. You can find comics that I write at gocomics.com. You can find my new comic, American Chop Suey, on there, gocomics.com/American Chop Suey. And I also do a series called The Uncontrollable Recklass, which is at tapas.io. I always forget. I'm going to put the links in the description. That's about it. Thanks, everybody, for listening and or watching, and we will see you all next time with Alex and hopefully Taryn in tow.